what I didn't mention was when I did come in on that famous day in January, when my mother took me by the hand and took me to this place. During that week, there had been a big convoy been picked up of Jews, had been picked up and sent east to the camps. And there were 1,600 in the convoy. There were 287 children in that convoy, of which not a single child returned. And I could have easily been amongst those children, if not for the generosity and the courage of this wonderful family.
And the determination of your parents.
And the determination of my parents. At the same time, you had to find homes that would take children in. It's true that in Belgium there was a whole network. I didn't go in there through that network, but there was a network, and several thousand children were saved by a network, a non-Jewish network that looked after these kids and saw them through the war, and the children survived. I think it was something like 3,000 or more children survived in that sort of way. And we've got to look at it also in light of the fact that statements came out from the headquarters of the Gestapo in Brussels when they realized that there were Gentile families hiding Jewish children. And the statement was, we will not tolerate Gentile families keeping children with them, looking after them, and Jewish children hiding in those conditions. And this family, the Van den Borren family, didn't blink. They kept me. They kept the children from going to school so that they wouldn't by accident say, we've got a little Jewish girl living with us. I was given strict instructions. The only Yiddish words I knew at that stage were Ich bin a Yiddish Mädele. I'm a little Jewish girl. They were the very words that I was not to repeat and not to say for the rest of the war. So I went in there in January 43, and life, well, we had to, yes, I was just a little girl, so I accepted that this was what I had to do. I remembered my mother's words, and in fact, Miquette told me years later she never saw me cry. She never saw me cry. It's quite remarkable for a child of 4 who's not with their parents and not with their sister, not with the family. But of course, these people were exceptionally good to me. They did not want to take money for looking after me. When my mother could pick something up in an item of food that was hard to get, an egg, something like that, she would bring it, and the ones to benefit were Miquette and I, the 2 youngest ones. And Philippe remembers being hungry. In fact, straight after the war, he had to go to a sanatorium because he was badly undernourished. And he remembers, and he even remembers feeling a bit resentful that there was this extra child, an extra mouth to feed. He told me that later on, although he felt very, very close to me afterwards when we met again. So I spent my days playing with Miquette. The grandfather, whom we used to all call Ta, he argued, he used to laugh and say that I would be a mathematician when I grew up because I was learning to count, I suppose, at that stage, 4, then 5, and I would run around the whole house and count all the taps in the house. and he said, I'll grow up into a mathematician. I remember his voice. I remember Nana's voice very clearly. And when Easter came and the bells were pealing, Miquette and I ran in the garden, into the back little garden that we had, and there was a little toy for her and a toy for me, and I got a little pull-along, I can't remember what sort of little bunny, a pull-along bunny, and so that was for me, and she got something else. So I was considered one of their grandchildren. The mother, Marianne, would take us out to the park quite often, and I remember very clearly that on one occasion a Nazi officer was standing, a Gestapo officer was standing by the tram, and of course they tried to be very polite and very helpful to the Belgian population, and to help Marianne, who had a few children that she was taking off the tram, he apparently took me off the tram. But I remember this. I remember the fear that totally engulfed me, that I was in the arms of this man that I shouldn't be in. But I couldn't see myself. I only felt this fear. Marianne told my mother afterwards that I went completely white. What I do remember is saying to her in French, I thought they had me then. And that was referring, obviously I understood enough to know that Jewish children were being picked up and taken away. So I did experience that great fear, but I was very lucky to be with this beautiful family. My mother tried to come once a week to visit. She was very brave, very courageous. She had a forged identity card, so she would travel freely on the trams, and she came to visit me, but she really never hugged me, she never kissed me, she kept her distance from me, because she was afraid she may not see me again. She was also afraid that I would go to pieces if she hugged me. She just tried to keep a distance, and she would sit and talk to Nana. For the length of her visit, she was sitting and talking to Nana.
And what sort of danger did it put her in to come and visit you? And did you ever see your father?
I never saw my father. My father had a very Semitic appearance, so he stayed home the whole time. I believe he developed all sorts of skills. My father became quite a good pastry cook during the war with a little bit of ingredients they had, but they were in a room they paid for and in hiding, and I never saw him. My mother, they were always in danger. On one occasion, my mother, who used to distribute money that came in from the joint from America, she used to distribute that money. It used to come through the underground, through the resistance. She used to distribute money to families that had lost their jobs, Jewish families lost their jobs and had no resources to keep alive. So she would distribute the money to them. And on one occasion, she was actually with my sister. She had a list of names where she used to go, and they got taken off. There was a search on the tram. But by that, it was quite interesting, because the search was not Dafka that day, it was not for Jews. It was a search for illegal migrants that were there. And she of course knew she was going to be searched. While waiting to be searched, they used to search you physically to see what you had on you. She actually swallowed that list of names, because she knew that if they found a list of names on her, they would go, and the names were probably very obviously Jewish, they would go and round up those Jews. So she ate that, and she also knew to send my sister away and said, just disappear, you don't belong to me. And Flores tells the story. She stayed round the corner watching what was going to happen. So there was constant danger. My mother, that on that occasion, her card was fine, and she continued her travel. Yes, she needed courage. She was in her 30s, so she had this kind of courage and strength. And she truly was the tigress during the war, or the lioness that looks after her young. She was so driven. My father didn't leave his hiding place. They were denounced on one occasion, and that was a problem. They were nearly picked up. Miraculously, they survived. My father had set up a system of bells that would contact all the Jews hiding in that particular set of apartments around the courtyard, very typical in Europe. Everything with a big double door in the front, a big wooden double door that would lead into a courtyard, and around the courtyard were all these apartments. And there were quite a few Jews hiding there. And my father had set up that a hiding place in the cellar should any problems arise. On this one occasion, yes, they heard the knocking at the front door, and they disappeared into the cellar, leaving everything. And in that cellar, my father there was a cupboard. You pulled the cupboard to the entrance to the cellar so that the entrance to the cellar was not visible. And the Germans went through with these high-powered torches, and they did not notice the entrance to the cellar. But my parents knew jolly well that they would come back the next day when the landlady, she was out when they came, so she couldn't help them, but she would be there on the following another day, and they decided they had to get out there and then and not stay in this hiding place. So they went on the tram, and they went out of town to a distant suburb where they had a friend living openly. He was living still in his Jewish friend, living in his house. His wife had been killed in one of these blackouts in an accident. She'd been trampled to death in a sort of a stampede. And he was living alone in that house. They moved in there, but they knew they couldn't stay there. And through the accountant I mentioned before, they managed to find another place, a family that would take them in. Again, wonderful family. She a teacher, he an engineer, 3 children. They sent children away to the country to an aunt so as to secure their existence, to make sure they were not in danger. And they took my parents in.
And what happened to all the Jews who stayed behind and did not go to another hiding place?
Well, from what I recall my parents telling me, they were rounded up, and I don't think any of them survived.
And was it the landlady of that building who gave them away?
No, it was actually the daughter, or it was a relative of the landlady, who had a German lover, and she had denounced or said that, my mother's hiding Jews in her property. That's all you needed to say, and they were there to check it out. So it wasn't actually the landlady. But my parents did survive, and at the end of the war, my mother came to fetch me, and I remember so clearly the day she left me, so clearly, as I said before. I remember what I wore, and I remember Nana opening the door and everything else. I cannot remember my mother picking me up. But I do remember the apartment we moved into, and I remember starting life again after the war.